Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are at Sinai. So we've come through, right, a bunch of stuff, a bunch of plagues. We come out of Egypt. We're in the place of wandering, the place of nothingness, the place of openness, the place of vulnerability. We are in the Midbar. We are in the wilderness. And so we come through the story of them kvetching and complaining. He meets his father-in-law, Moshe does, Yitro, and he tells him all about the things that have happened to them. And then Moshe is instructed to get the people ready that now the whole point of being freed from Egypt is upon the nation. The entire point of the Exodus is this moment. Otherwise, it could have been, okay, y'all are free. Bye-bye. Have fun. Here's a plan for a 401k. Like, wait, they're not free just to be free, right? They are freed in order to enter into a covenantal relationship with the divine. So this is the entire point of the entire narrative of the Exodus. So you would think the book ends here. But it doesn't. All right, so let's continue. They've been brought to the foot of the mountain. They have been prepared for this encounter. Go on, Robert.
Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for Adonai had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln. The whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. Adonai came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and Adonai called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Adonai said to Moses, Go down. Go down. Warn the people not to break through to Adonai to gaze, lest many of them perish. The priests also, who come near Adonai, must stay pure, lest Adonai break out against them. But Moses said to Adonai, People cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, Set bounds about the mountain and sanctify it. So Adonai said to him, Go down and come back, together with Aaron. But let not the priests or the people break through to come up to Adonai, lest God break out against them. And Moses went down to the people and spoke to them.
Okay. So as we said last week, when Torah wants to convey a sense of the ineffable, that which can't really be put into words, the Torah jumbles the words a bit, jumbles the images. Is he up? Is he down? Go down. But God just said that. So God says, go down again. Did he go down? Did he come back up? Like, so it gets very confusing. And again, we tend to, as Western readers, go, that's so sloppy. Right? Like, fix that. Right? Because we are very wedded to our very linear way. We need everything to be lined up in a row. Right? And we like it very linear. That is not the way the ancient world thought, and it's not the way the ancient world expressed itself. So, we have to appreciate literature in its own setting. And so that's one of the reasons it stays kind of confusing and jumbled. A, because this is an experience that is really not able to be expressed in words, like most religious experiences, like most profound, if you think about our most profound experiences, it is very hard to put into words, right? What happens, what we feel, what goes on. It's very hard. Because words are not a great vehicle. Words are not a very good vehicle for expressing the ineffable. So this is one of the ways Torah handles that, is to make it kind of complicated and hard to understand, because it's hard to understand moments of revelation. So we get this idea that there's a concentration, God's kavod, God's presence comes down upon the mountain. So once that happens, the mountain essentially becomes nuclear, right? So the instruction not to let the people come, right, too close to the mountain or to touch the mountain or to see too much is because it's dangerous for them. That they are not in a role. They are not prepared. They are not ready. They are not able to make contact with the nuclear and survive it. Diane?
I was going to say, in psychology we say when you go down, that means you go down into your psyche and it's dangerous. We have it in our dreams. It's very, you get very unsettled. And I think when you say you go down and we're near God, and we get very confused, and it's frightening because you have to deal with your own shadows. Right.
And that is certainly, it's certainly a terrifying event. We get that all over rabbinic literature. This is a terrifying event for the people. Sheldon?
Trivial, dumb question.
No such thing.
Who's blowing the horn?
Who's blowing the horn? See, we love a careful reading of the text, right? So, we're not told. Right? We're not told. So then, what would you suggest?
Well, it's probably God in some fashion, but it would be the first time God actually takes an instrument and blows it, so it has to be something.
All right, so that possibly it's, amongst all these things that are happening that are a manifestation of the divine, perhaps a sound that's loud like a horn is part of all of that, right? So if you think in the ancient world of the things that would have been the biggest things you can think of to describe a huge event, we are so inundated with, big stuff that we get desensitized, right? But if you think about the biggest stuff there was, thunder, lightning were huge events, particularly in the desert, right? When you've got storms like that, it's huge. And this is just a second, David. Israel's on the Syro-African rift. So a lot of the buildings that have been destroyed in Israel, when you go to see ruins in Israel, a lot of cities were devastated not by war, but by earthquakes. When I was in Beersheba, living in Beersheba, in the dorms, I woke up because the blinds were smacking against the wall, and I was like, "What in the world? Like, is it?" And but the window was closed, so it's like it can't be wind, right? And then I realized, I was feeling kind of seasick, right? And then I realized the bed was starting to bump against the wall, and we were having a major earthquake in Beersheba, right? The whole building is swaying. So it's very common, and a lot of devastation has resulted in Israel from earthquakes. So when they think of the biggest things that could be, right, terrifying in terms of, and awesome too, not just terrifying, but awesome, it is thunder, it is lightning, it is things shaking, and remember that these are people who dealt with a lot of fire, like they lived close to fire, that they lived around the fire, they cooked around the fire, they worked around the fire, so smoke is a big part of it. War certainly results in devastating fire and smoke. So it makes some sense that these are the ways that, that Torah talks about this being the biggest experience. You put all of those things together, and you've got one of the biggest experiences our people can remember. David?
Rabbi, couldn't you also look at this as God, the way he's saying go down and talk to people, as God wanting to maintain the mystique, this ineffable, who is he? Familiarity breeding contempt. I'm here, believe in me, but don't see me, or something like that.
Certainly we can predicate all kinds of motives to God, but several times in Torah we seem to see God caring for the people by saying, tell them not to touch this, tell them not to touch that, because it's supercharged by my presence. So when God is in, let's say, the tabernacle, nobody can go into the Holy of Holies because it is supercharged and they will die. So now if you want to say the motive there is that, again, God doesn't want to be, quote unquote, seen, okay, we can predicate that. It seems, though, because we get God saying it several times, for a human being can't see me and live.
Except for Moses or Aaron.
Moses seems to see more than anyone else has, but not even Moses sees God. God says, I'm going to put my hand over you and I will pass before you and you will see my afterwards.
But God is calling Moses then to come into the fire pit. I mean, knowing God must assume that he can control the pit so Moses doesn't die.
I'm not sure what the pit is.
Well, the fire and the don't let me...
Oh, coming up to the mountain. Right. Yeah, the Moshe can get closer than anybody else. Okay. Reuben?
In this context, it's interesting that God refers to herself in the third person.
Very nice. Very nice, Reuben. So let's pay attention to that as we get to the actual Aseret HaDibrot, because the rabbis go exactly there. They go, notice where God talks about God's self in the third person.
Mm-hmm. I feel a little bit schizophrenic when I read this, just because we're saying God does this, but people wrote this, so
yes,
they're imagining what God did. So
yes,
you can see how it would be confusing, and they would switch to he said or I said, because they're talking about not themselves really. They're attributing things to God, but I just feel very confused about. The way we're talking, it's God said, but in Reconstructionism, we don't believe that God said it, so that's why I'm, Right,
so what I'll ask you to do is hold all of our conversation here as if we were in a sacred literature class.
Okay.
So when I read Jane Eyre and talk about it in class, we say, Jane says to, right, we don't mean we believe Jane existed and said something. What we're saying is we're entering the story. And if we're really going to experience the story and talk about it, we talk from what's happening, right? So I'm not suggesting God said. I'm suggesting the material we're looking at, right? If we're going to enter the story, God says, the people do this, Moshe does that, right? Right? And it's interesting, like, we don't have that problem with any other literature that we talk about, right? We have it with Torah, right? Because it's been translated as fundamentally every word actualized, true, fact, history, whatever. And so we have this kind of reaction, right? So what you lift up is how differently people understand this text. And I'm not going to suggest that there isn't some element of something happening here that still happens. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. I mean, I believe God still speaks from the mountain. God's still calling. Right? And looking for relationship. Okay. All right. So then we get to the end of 19, and Moshe goes down to speak to the people to make sure everything is in place, that all of the safeguards are in place, because the moment is about to happen where there's going to be contact between the divine and the people. Right? And that is a huge moment. It's very dangerous. It's very loaded. It's very powerful. And Moshe's got to make sure everything is in place for this meeting to happen. And it's going to be, the people experience physically, what they see, if you will, is the thunder, the lightning, the shaking, the smoke, right? And they hear things. But the main encounter, and here's where Judaism is in some ways unique. Israelite religion is unique. The encounter is with all the people. This is critical. All the people are present. All the people experience the revelation. That is unique in the ancient world. This has never happened before in the religions of the ancient Near East. That everyone heard the most important meeting, the most important thing. Always it's been the prophet, or it's been the king, right? Or it's been the priests who had soul, understanding, knowledge, experience of the ritual, the commandments, what you're supposed to do. The Code of Hammurabi, we get, that the people are given the code, but it's the king in consultation with the gods who initiates the code. The people don't confront the gods. Yes? So even though it's a similar idea, this is unique in the ancient world. Yes?
And it still is. We're the only people who have had a national revelation. everybody else it's maybe one guy, and we all have to believe in one guy. But not us.
Not us.
It does make this unique.
Did that change with the Kohanim in later times? No?
What did what change?
Well, that there was people who were trained or through inheritance were the priests that, liaison and did all those special things. I mean, I'm just wondering if that in any way...
Every ancient religion had priests. Every ancient religion of the Levant had priests. So that's a given that you're going to have priests. The question is, what's the role of the priests? In other religions in the neighborhood and in the world, I would say, the priests were the only ones who knew the rituals and what had to happen. So the people needed them in order to know what it was they had to do to live in right relationship with the deity. In ancient Israel, the priests served on behalf of the people, and the people were commanded to know and to teach to their children what was supposed to be done to live in right relationship to the deity. Do you see the difference? The priests carried it out, but they were not the ones with the knowledge, right? And therefore not sharing that with the people.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I was just kind of thinking about like what people think about the Pope, for example, and if priests in the temple had, if that kind of process started happening later on, obviously not what's going on here, but in the temple, once the temple was...
All right, so one important thing to remember is later on, not here. Yeah. This is written later on.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's
so
true.
This is written by people who already had priests.
Yeah.
Right? And some people would argue that's already done. That's already been destroyed when this is written. Okay, so I'll move on in a second. But we're going to have this conversation when we get to Leviticus. I promise. So you have to keep coming. Preview. But part of it is about how do we understand the priesthood, and what's different about when you talk about the Pope and Catholic priests. And I'll stop here, but we will talk about this a lot more. I promise. The difference between Catholic priests and the ancient Israelite understanding of priests is that the ancient Israelite priests could do things on behalf of the people that no one else could do because God chose to put them in danger. If they screwed it up, they died. They took the risk of keeping everything like it had to go so nothing blew up. If it blew up, it blew up in their faces. So it was understood as a risk. Right? That, they kind of got put in harm's way so the people didn't have to. The Catholic priesthood understands the priest as being able to make something happen that couldn't happen if it wasn't them doing it. So the blood, right, the wine actually turning into the blood of Christ only can be affected by a priest. Transubstantiation only happens because of the, whatever you want to call it, the zappage, thank you, that's usually the word I use, of the priest. And that is not the idea of the priesthood in ancient Israelite religion. All right. I saw a hand over here.
I was taught that not only was the entire nation of Israel there for the revelation, but everybody in this room was there, including all of your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-great-grandchildren, that everyone who affiliated as a Jewish soul was also there at the Revelation. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So there is another place where we have the quote from Torah that I bind not only you who are standing here this day to this covenant, but those who are not here today. And that's in Deuteronomy. And that statement was translated by the rabbis to mean, what can it mean? It's not only binding on all of you here, but all of you who aren't here. Like, what could that possibly mean? And for the rabbis, they unpack that to mean all future generations of Jews. That it's binding, that the covenant's binding.
Binding where we're there.
Midrash, there's lots of different versions. There's not one standard edition, which is one of the things that makes us crazy and makes us wonderful as a people. There's lots of there's lots of midrashim. The one that has become most common, the one that most of us know, because we like it, is that every soul that would ever be Jewish was actually there at Sinai, right? So, and anyone who would ever, the rabbis go so far as to say anyone who would ever choose Judaism, anyone who would ever join the Jewish people was at Sinai already. So it's a really inclusive way, right, of reading the text to say, this mythic moment happened to all of us, which I love. It's a beautiful teaching. And I think I've told this story before, but among elder people in Duluth, somebody would say something like, you look really familiar to me, and they'd say, well, of course, I know you from Sinai. Right? So it's a lovely way of saying, doesn't matter if we've met, in this life or did, we know each other from Sinai. All right. Anything else? Linda?
I don't know if this is the right time to ask this, but at one we're talking about what will happen to the people if they get too close to the fire and so forth. Yet God is seeking a relationship with the people.
Yeah.
And the people are and wanting the people to have a relationship with God.
Yeah.
Isn't that more scary to think you might die if you get too close as opposed to wanting to build a relationship?
So define close.
In presence.
So is that what God seeks? Is the people to be close in presence?
No, He just wants the people to follow it.
So in a way, you've just answered your own question.
I guess I did.
So it's not that simple, of course. I'm going to complicate it now. But in some ways, like, what is close? What does relationship mean? It doesn't seem to mean physical proximity, right? Because what do we get? What is God about to say? Not, okay, here's how you can sit close to me, right? Doesn't seem to be the focus. Not that, and I'm going to complicate that statement in a second, but it seems to be, here's how you need to behave in order to be close to me. That's what relationship means for God. If you behave in certain ways, the way I want you to, then that brings you closer to me. Now that I've said that, I'm going to complicate it with right? There's the Mishkan. There's the tabernacle, like where God's presence is going to dwell, because the people want God among the people, and God is the one with but God's the one who says, let them make a Mishkan that I might dwell among them. So it does seem that God too wants physical proximity to the people, God's concentrated essence to be among the people, and the people want that but are a little nervous about that, with good reason, right? Because it's dangerous. Just like here. We're going to see the people here too are not real sure, right, about this.
This is so dangerous for the people. They really must have felt the need to have this relationship in spite of the danger, because it's kind of scary.
So the people, I'm just repeating this because people at home can't necessarily hear your question or your insightful comment. So Linda's saying that the people must really need this to be willing to take the risks that seems to be associated with a relationship that's this intense and therefore that dangerous. And I'm going to suggest every single thing we do that is of great import is dangerous. When I went into a planned C-section, I knew I might not come out of it. I knew that, right? And so why do we do that? Why in the world would you go let them cut you open knowing you could bleed to death? Because Eliana Faye needed to come into this world, right? So I needed to be a mother. Why? I don't know. It's crazy what we do, that we have children. It's so crazy, right? That we're going to take on this incredible burden, that we're going to take on this incredible responsibility for a soul that we help put in a body, and make sure it stays safe and make sure it gets educated and fed. Why do we do that? Why do we fall in love and give somebody that kind of access to our innermost selves and turn over power over our own happiness in certain ways? Why would anyone do that? It's dangerous, right? And anything that's really at the core of what it means, I think, to go to meaning it's got its own other side, which is that it can hurt, it can destroy, it can frighten us. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We're called into confronting that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I didn't think that far ahead, I guess. But,
job security. I'm just saying, job security.
The flip of what you're saying, and maybe what this is also about, is that there are boundaries that need to be, and that if you get too close, if you give up too much of yourself, then healthy relationships, whether it's a relationship with God or with other human beings, doesn't happen.
Or it happens and you're destroyed. Right? If we give over too much of ourselves in relationship, we disappear on some level, and I think you're exactly right, Paula. I think Torah is very clear. There have to be boundaries. That's what the priesthood is about. There have to be rules and boundaries, because many traditions, the idea is, what is it? How do you say? Union with the divine. Right? The idea is union, that your boundaries completely fall away and you become one, with the divine. And in some cultures that meant actually, right, destroying one's actual self, but in a lot of times it's one's psyche, one's own will, one's own desire. You put that aside to become a monk, that, I no longer have needs and desires other than to be with the divine. And Judaism says it, nope, and nope. That is not the goal. We're not talking about anybody else. For us, the goal isn't to give oneself over entirely. There need to be boundaries. It's about a relationship. And without boundaries, there isn't relationship. There's just mushy oneness. Torah that's not Jewish. For us, it's about distinction. It's about differences. It's about coming together across a divide. Choosing to be in relationship, and all that entails, and all that risks, and all that means that you're not me and I'm not you. You're going to stay Rita, I'm going to stay Amy, and that's going to have a lot of complications. Right? I don't need you to be me, and I'm not going to try to be you. That's already complicated. That for us is the goal. That we stay with how complicated relationship is. As we stay other, as we stay unique, as we stay different.
An interesting aspect, because the fact that I was Catholic, as a young Catholic, the goal was to be completely selfless.
Right.
So it's the internal, for some of the people, and for me, was a very difficult thing to understand. Selfless, you have nothing left of yourself.
Right.
The goal is to become selfless.
Right. And that is not the goal, right, in Judaism and in Jewish living and in Jewish tradition. So what happens at this mountain? What is this encounter between the divine and this crazy people, this mixed multitude that just came out of slavery and oppression? The dregs of Egyptian society have been taken out of Egypt and are now standing at the mountain. What is this encounter for us? Just like in the creation narrative, the creation happens with speech, with words. So the creation of this relationship, the creation of the covenant, is also going to happen through speech, through words. All right. Daled bet resh. What does it mean? What's that shoresh mean? What does that Hebrew root mean? Listen to how many words just came out. Speak, if it's a verb. Word, if it's a noun. What else? Thing. Very important. So, this Hebrew shoresh, sorry, I know some of you don't read Hebrew. Or, because in Hebrew, this letter changes to be each other. Depending on the grammatical context, this is the same letter. So, did someone just say just like Spanish?
Yes.
Okay. So, depending grammatically where this word appears and how it appears is whether or not it takes a dagesh and becomes a bet or stays a vet. So it's either a b or a v. So it doesn't matter. If you're b, v, it doesn't matter. So whenever we get this d, b, r, or d, v, r, we are talking about speaking in the verbal form. If it's a noun, it means, and usually it's a little confusing in Hebrew, but it makes sense to me in a way, it means both word and the thing the word is pointing to. So you have to know in context, is it talking about the word or the thing? Right? So in English, those are very different things. There's the word, which is an abstract, right? We're very Western. We're very based on Greek philosophy. Word means the abstract concept table. The word table is an abstract, right? Table. As an idea. The table thing is a thing. It's actual, right? No distinction in Hebrew. They did not buy the material abstract split. Right? We are very much inheritors of that split in the West because it was Greeks who came up with that split. Right? Think Plato, Aristotle. There's a split between the abstract and the material. That is post this text. And we never bought it. We in the West bought it, but not the tradition. So it stays much more complicated and rich in Hebrew that davar is both the word indicating the thing and the thing. Okay. So what we're getting in just a moment, this speech, this speaking that God is about to do, the words that God's about to speak, right? So in Hebrew, it's like God is wording. Do you see how in Hebrew it all comes together more? We say speak in English, and words are what you speak. In Hebrew, God words to the people. And here are the words that God words to the people. Right? All right. So the words that God is going to word to the people are called Devarim. The 10 Devarim is how they've come to be known. Aseret HaDibrot. Now, what is it pointing to? The 10 speakings? The 10 statements? Or the 10 things?
Yes.
Items? The answer is yes. Right. Aseret HaDibrot. So next time you hear somebody say the 10 commandments, you can go, well, not really. Not really. These are not the 10 commandments. These are 10 things. 10 utterances. Right? Because it's much more than 10 words. And how it gets divided, how these words get divided into 10 individual things is not uniform. Even in the ancient Jewish world. It's not clear. So the Christians have a very different way of breaking out these words into 10 separate items. And even among the Jewish tradition, the scholars, going all the way back to Philo of Alexandria, there's different ways of pulling out which sentences go together to make 10 things. Okay? So we all think, oh, it's so clear. Right? But it's because we've chosen one representation of that. But it's not uniform across centuries or across thinkings or even across religions. All right.
Does that arrangement that's different change the meanings of the commandments? Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, the ones that are obvious that we're going to get to, thou shalt not murder. Okay. That is pretty clear. That's a thing, right? So there's some where it's not an issue, but it's at the very beginning and a little bit later where we'll say that it's a little like, which exactly is the commandment, right?
Don't the things come up again in Deuteronomy?
Yes.
So are they the same things?
Slightly different version. Slightly different. So that's one of the variances is already here. All right. So let's look at 20.
God spoke all these words, saying, I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is the heavens above or the earth below or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, your God Adonai, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not swear falsely by the name of your God Adonai, for Adonai will not clear one who swears falsely by God's name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of your God Adonai. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth and sea, and all that is in them, and then rested on the seventh day. Therefore Adonai blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Honor your mother and father, that you may long endure on the land, and that your God Adonai is assigning to you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor male, nor female slave, nor ox, nor ass, not anything that is your neighbor's. All right. All the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, and the mountains smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey. But let not God speak to us, lest we die. Moses answered the people, be not afraid, for God has come only in order to test you, and in order that the fear of God may be ever with you, so that you do not go astray. So the people remained at a distance, while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was.
Okay. So where exactly did that moment happen where the people flipped out and said, we can't handle it? Right? So some want to say it happens right there. They hear the 10 Commandments and they freak out and they don't want to hear anymore. They're done. And so Moshe, according to some rabbinic midrashim, goes to get the rest of Torah. Right? And so the people are like, we can't deal. But most of rabbinic tradition, and again, it's not right or wrong. This is the way it's come through the generations. Most of rabbinic tradition holds that the people only hear the first utterance. And it goes to what Reuben said earlier, that it switches from second person to third person. So go back to 20, verse 1. I am Adonai, your God, right? Speaking to the people who took y'all, because it's plural, right? Who took y'all out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Then it switches. Lo yiyeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai, to the singular, right? You, each of you shall not have, right, any other God before you, meaning you won't have a relationship with any other God, right? And then we get, again, in the second person singular. The rabbis, go back to verse 2, say, because this is where it actually starts, because otherwise it's an introductory statement that God spoke to all the people saying, Anochi Adonai, I am Yud He Vav He, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Is this one of the items? Is this a commandment?
You shall have no other gods before me is certainly a commandment. Yeah.
So tell me, Reuben, what does this call us into if we want to call it a commandment? How, if we're looking at 10 commandments, would this be number 1?
Yeah.
How? Tell me.
Because there's nothing before it.
So it can either be an introductory statement or one of the 10.
We're talking about the beginning of it.
Yes.
I am indeed talking about the beginning, yes.
Yeah. So that is an introductory statement.
We have to know who's speaking to us. I mean, I'm the God, which, who are you? I'm the God who brought you out of bondage. So it's kind of, it's saying, here's who I am before he even starts.
Let's say it's
the
both.
commandments.
It's a pitch.
It's a pitch, Sarah says.
It's an introduction.
This is the reason why.
Yeah, because hi, I'm Rabbi Abby, and today we'll be teaching Exodus.
All right,
That's not part of it.
there are some who say this is number 1. I am Yud Hey Vav Hey, your God. That's number 1. You will take me as your God. That's number 1. Not an introduction, not an introductory statement. They know who they're dealing with. They've been hanging out with this God for a while. There's been a bunch of plagues. There's been a bunch of schlepping through water. They know who they're dealing with. This is number 1. I, Yud Hey Vav Hey, Elohecha. I am your God. Baal can be theirs. Buddha can be theirs. Adonai Elohecha. Commandment number 1. I will be your God. Period. And because I brought you out of the land of Egypt. It's important to know that in treaties, when you have a covenant between a conquering king and a vassal king, and we know that all of these are based on that model, right? That was the common model in the ancient world. The radical move, the reconstruction that ancient Israel does is who is the king with whom the covenant is being made? The King of Kings. That is a radical new move in the ancient world. But the format is standard. Okay? So it's not the format that's the big wow, right? The big wow is the king is not a human king. So in those vassal treaties, the conquering king, right, always says, I am Queen Amy, who beat up your queen. Therefore, I am your queen. That is always the first statement. What are my grounds for calling you into a covenantal relationship with me? Right? Because it means exclusive. You can't have another queen, only me. So, in all of them, it starts with, what are the grounds? And the grounds here are, I took you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage.
And it's in the first person.
Correct. The rabbi said, there's a beautiful mystical tradition that says, when we look at the first word of Revelation, what is the first word? Anochi. What does Anochi mean? I. Me. The first letter is? What sound does an aleph make? No sound. Aleph doesn't make a sound.
But if it has the line under it.
One has to give it a vowel for it to have a sound. The letter itself is not a consonant, right? It has to take a vowel in order to make a sound. And so the rabbis say the people only heard Anochi. There's a tradition that says the people only heard Anochi and that was enough. They were done. I. And that was it. They were done. They flipped out there and said, Moshe, you go deal with this. This is way, way above our pay grade, right? You go deal with this. I love the rabbinic tradition that says all the people heard was the Aleph. What the people heard was silence. That revelation happens in silence. And that is the beginning of revelation. I mean, that's one teaching, is that the beginning of revelation is silence. And the other is that was what the people heard, was the Aleph of Anochi. And that's all.
This might be very irreverent, but I'm seeing the onset of Jewish guilt here.
In what way?
Well, look, I saved you, therefore you have to devote yourselves to me. That's a guilt trip. And then it goes on to talking about, passing the guilt of the parents onto the children.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very strange concept, the idea of guilt.
It's very strange to us.
Yeah.
It's very strange to us. In the ancient world, and certainly in early Israelite religion, it was not an individual religion. It was a collective. Right? So there is no individual. If you as an individual sin and start messing things up, you contaminate everything for everybody else. That is why you have capital punishment in Torah. Because it will contaminate everything. So for them, for us it's very strange, but for ancient Israel, what we do affects our children's ability to have a relationship. And it's a collective responsibility. And the point of that statement is not, look out, it's going to be on your kids. It was understood that it was generational. It was understood. All y'all who are here and all of you who aren't here, it's a collective and it's generationally forward. The point of that statement is to say, it's not to the 1000th generation that my wrath and my, will go, only to the 4th. But if you live in right relationship to me, my kindness will go to the 1000th generation. So it's more of a statement about where the focus is that to us sounds very strange. But it would not have sounded strange in the ancient world. And going to guilt is not a bad thing.
Not always.
Not always. Shame is a bad thing. Shame is different. There's not shame here. There is, you have a responsibility. You're free. You have a responsibility to the source of your freedom. And that responsibility is to treat other people well. And if you don't, that's bad. Right? So, according to this, and I would say even according to some of my own understandings about covenantal relationship, guilt is not a bad thing. On Yom Kippur, we spend a lot of time saying what we've done wrong. Because that is the only way we can move forward into doing it differently. And if we don't feel badly for having done it wrong, why would we change?
Well, it's the definition of guilt. There's a whole discussion.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is the part of guilt that paralyzes is not good, but that's not here. We have an obligation to the source of life, says our tradition. Now, you don't have to buy that. You can say that's a bad thing. You can say obligation is already a problem. That's fine. But that's who we are. Right? Those of us who feel bound by some kind of godliness, the call to be godly, and that is not just optional, that is a foundational obligation of being moral, ethical, thinking human beings. We do feel an obligation. It's not just when I feel like it. Right? I'm never supposed to speak terribly to somebody else. Doesn't mean I don't do it. But there is an obligation to treat people better than that.
Well, that makes it civilized.
Right. And now where people go with shame, or internalizing guilt, that's a whole nother, that is a great conversation. Sarah?
You can bypass guilt and go to gratitude. That is being, as you speak about responsibility, don't forget that you are here because I brought you out of Egypt. I mean, that's like recognizing to whom you owe gratitude. And gratitude makes you happy.
Yes.
According to recent research.
According to age-old wisdom and recent research, gratitude makes one happy, right? Don't take for granted that you are not slaves. Remember, this is not written by slaves. This is written by people way later. Don't take for granted that you are not enslaved. I try hard not to take for granted that as a female, I am not living in many parts of this world right now. And that is not because I earned it. And it's not because I deserve it. And it's not because I did it. I am blessed to have been born in America. Right? I am very blessed. Don't ever take that for granted. And because you know that freedom, you have obligations to work for the freedom of other people. Yes?
I think also just on a purely human level, if somebody saves your life, they're your friend for life. And so I think that the beginning is important because it's like, why should I listen to you? Because I saved your life. And, you know.
Right. Why should we give godliness a big place in our lives? Because it can save our life. I mean, it does save our lives. Right? It makes us civilized. Yes.
Is shame the internalization of guilt?
Ha 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 ha. Very, very interesting question. So there's a wonderful book if you like this topic, which I do. I really like this topic. I think it's very important as a topic, so I don't mean to give it short shrift. Brené Brown is a writer and scholar who has spent a lot of time dealing with the issue of shame. And she's fabulous. You can watch her TED Talk. It's a 20-minute talk. Gorgeous. Brené, like Renee starting with a B. Brené Brown. And she has a book called Dancing at the Shame Prom. And she has a very interesting discussion about the difference between guilt and shame. And essentially, guilt is what motivates us to be better people. And guilt is not a feeling. Guilt is a judgment. I should have done X and I did Y. I feel guilty that I don't visit my mother in the nursing home more. That's not a feeling. That's a judgment. I should go see her, but I choose, or I feel too overwhelmed to go, so I don't go. Guilt is a judgment. We can make choices if we're looking at things as judgments. Then we can make a choice. Okay, do I want to go? Do I need to change that? Shame is when we turn that inward to say, I don't go see my mother as much as I think I should, and therefore I'm a bad person. I'm selfish. I'm self-obsessed. I'm self-absorbed. I don't love her. I'm not a good daughter. All of that is shame. Who I am, right? So one is about what I do. The other is about who I am. And that is a very important distinction that I have seen work beautiful things in people's lives when we sit together and they say, I feel guilty. Then I start down this whole speech gently and respectfully and lovingly. Guilt's not a feeling, right? So, and then we have this conversation and it's amazing to see, you can watch the weight lift from people when they start to separate out judgment and shame.
And the wicked stepsister is humiliation.
And the wicked stepsister is?
Humiliation.
Say more.
Because humiliation is really what one person does to another person in order to try and, in essence, shame them. And humiliation is a very bad trait.
Yes. Yes. The rabbis say that humiliating another person is akin to murder. Yeah. It's the same as murder. They call it halbanat panim, the whitening of the face. That when you embarrass someone in public, the blood just drains from their face and they go white. The rabbis call this halbanat panim, the whitening of someone's face. They say is murder.
I've heard the argument that in a relationship between two people, that actually humiliation causes more damage than the act of the adultery.
Interesting.
People can get over if there was a physical lack of fidelity, but you let the world know and you humiliate your spouse, it's over.
Right.
That's the thing from the movie last night. We saw Get.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody saw it. I to everybody.
So I've given you a handout that is from Rabbi Rami Shapiro, who you've heard me quote a lot. Often we look at the Ten Commandments and go, okay, yeah, those are the fundamentals of human society, but really what does it have to do with me? I don't steal, right? I don't covet my neighbor's wife. I don't, like what is this really? I don't murder anybody, duh. Right? A lot of these really don't have very much to do with me. So what I love is this book by Rabbi Rami Shapiro called Minyan, 10 Principles for Living a Life of Integrity. And it takes kind of, this idea of the 10 and puts it in language that's a little bit more accessible for us. For some people it's a turnoff because it's too new agey or whatever, that's fine. But I love this book. I love the work of taking these things and pulling them spiritually into being meaningful for our time. And I think Rami's one of the geniuses at doing that of our generation. Many folks have chosen to do study groups around this book because it's incredible conversation. So I've given you the distilled 10 principles is what he chooses to call Devarim, right? So let's look at number 1. We'll just go quickly through, but I just want to show you. And sit with these at home for a while and see what you think. Number 1, Yud Hey Vav Hey. Anochi Yud Hey Vav Hey. I am Yud Hey Vav Hey. That's number 1 for Rami, right? That's not an introductory statement, right? The unnamed and unnameable reality, capital R, is God. The source and substance of all being and becoming. That's the principle number 1. Unnamed, unnameable reality, capital R, is God. Number 2. Yud Hey Vav Hey cannot be imagined and must not be imaged. Right? I vow, and so he has commitments that come out of each one of these, and for him, the commitment that comes out of number 2, I vow to practice meditation. We could put in there prayer, song, dance, whatever, as a means of emptying the mind of thought and image, and thereby awakening God. So what is he saying? One of the things he's saying is God can't be imaged means we worship images all the time. That's where we spend our time and energy and attention is on images. The image of me having that conversation, and this time I said something really smart in response. Right? That's where we're obsessed. That's where we spend our time. That's where we focus. That's where we spend our energy. Or I knew I shouldn't have taken that left turn, right? And we go on forever, and then I wouldn't have had the accident, and we relive the left turn over and over and over and over and over, right? That God can't be imaged means get the images out. That is the way we come close to Yud Hey Vav Hey. Number 3, do not misuse religion or spirituality by taking God in vain. And he says, aware of the suffering caused by the misuse of God in religion and the quest of power, I vow never to mistake my path as the path. What if everybody did that? Right? But not taking God's name in vain for him means I won't use God's name, my version of what I believe is going on with that, to be the only one or the best one or what it means you have to do. And so his commitment out of that, I dedicate myself to humility in matters of the Spirit, recognizing that at best, I glimpse but an infinitesimal slice of the infinite whole. Even when I get it, even when I'm right on, I'm seeing an infinitesimal slice of the unknowable whole. So somebody sitting across from me who doesn't get it because they're not saying what I'm saying, right, is seeing a different slice of the unknowable whole, possibly. Number 4, remember Shabbat, right, and set it apart. So we have to cultivate a time for attention, renewal, reflection, and recreation. Yeah? All right, so that we promise to cultivate Shabbats and look at 7-year cycles and maybe taking a break from regular ways we do things every 7 years and giving ourselves a way to recreate. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Aware of the suffering caused by old age, illness, and death, I vow to care for my parents to the best of my ability. The best of my ability in any given week, in any given moment. The best of my ability. It doesn't mean X. It doesn't mean Y. It doesn't mean what this one tells you it needs to look like, or that one needs to tells you what it needs to look like. The best I can do right now is what's called from me. And notice it doesn't say I will love my parents.
Yeah.
Notice it doesn't say I will like my parents. Notice it doesn't say I'll forgive my parents. All right. And furthermore, I vow to promote the well-being of all elderly people, doing what I can to honor and respect both aging and the aged. Really important for our society, right? That denigrates so often our elders. Do not murder. Aware of the suffering caused by the needless and wanton destruction of life, I vow to cultivate compassion and justice and learn ways to protect the well-being of people, animals, plants, and minerals. What if we understood not killing as beyond murder? What if we really understood, right, how much destruction we wreak in this world? And even if you want to stay at murder, at what point does us living the way we live, knowing the impact, knowing that I buy minerals that people are killed for in Africa, diamonds that children work themselves to death, at what point am I contributing to the killing of other people? And by the way, traditionally, I just want to go back to the Torah text for a minute. It is not thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not murder. Right? So this is not saying that there aren't circumstances under which, and I think even Rami would agree, there are circumstances under which one is mandated to be willing to do what it takes. If someone came into this building to harm our children, no question, right? That I would be ready to kill. No question. And that is what's called for by Torah and by our tradition. Is self-defense, is mandated, as is, and I'm sure it's somewhere, those in our care. Is mandated that we protect them at all costs.
Unless you're a badass rabbi.
Number 7. To Rick's point, do not engage in sexual misconduct. Right? So, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct, I vow to cultivate sexual responsibility and not to engage in sexual relations without compassion and commitment. It doesn't say marriage, right? Notice, right? It's about what kind of commitment you have. And it doesn't even say what that is, right? And I love this. I vow to hallow pleasure and the senses by seeing the wonder of life within and around me. So for Rami, what he's saying is, A, not to misuse our sexuality, of course, but he's going to take it further, right? And say, that means pleasure is sanctified, right? It's part of this whole business of what is okay and what's not okay. It includes pleasure. Well, then it must be something special. So that means, right, cultivate it. It doesn't say don't. Here's just what you don't do. It means also it's something to be respected and honored and cultivated in our lives. And it's pleasure of all kinds. 8, do not steal. And he's going to, of course, call that exploitation, social injustice, theft, and oppression. I vow to practice acts of loving kindness towards all things. And I would say cultivating also awareness about how it is we need to change what we do so that we are not oppressing others. Do not lie. Aware of the suffering caused by wrongful speech and shallow listening, I vow to cultivate compassionate speech and attentive listening. I vow not to criticize or condemn things of which I'm not sure, and cultivate an open mind. Am I ready to say that? Right? I mean, part of it is like, put these on the wall and ask yourself. I mean, if I get honest about some of these, I'm a little uncomfortable. Right? I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain. Number 10, do not covet. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I vow to cultivate ethical eating, drinking, and consuming to promote both personal and planetary well-being. And here on the west side of LA, I vow to honor the different gifts of people and to respect the property of others, seeing in another's success inspirational lessons for my own efforts, rather than where we often go. How come I don't have that house? How come I don't have that pool or that car or that ring? This is often where we go. And it's okay that we go there. This is not saying, Torah is not saying you are bad or wrong or horrible for going there. It says you must not act on that. And Rami's saying he's going to change the language a little bit to make it more applicable to our time, to say you will cultivate the opposite that will allow you to keep these boundaries in a healthy place. So I'll ask you to sit with it and just see what it brings up for you. What are some of the core principles that you're ready to take on living into in order to contribute to this world being one of more equity and justice and compassion.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.